Imagine you're walking through a prehistoric savanna. You see two animals. One is a massive roaring predator, muscles rippling, teeth bared, a clear, terrifying display of strength. The other is a small, wounded creature, limping and whimpering in the open. Which one are you instinctively drawn to protect? Now, fast forward to the modern world. You scroll through your social media feed. You see one post from a CEO boasting about a record-breaking quarter. You see another, a meticulously crafted thread from an individual detailing a personal history of trauma and systemic injustice. Which narrative commands your immediate attention, your empathy, and often your vocal support? There's a profound disconnect here. For millions of years, the iron law of nature was simple. Signal strength to survive, because showing weakness was an invitation to be eliminated. Yet, in our complex human societies, we are witnessing something unprecedented, a competitive, public, and often highly rewarded display of victimhood. It's as if that wounded creature on the savannah isn't hiding, it's center stage, and its whimper has become the most powerful sound in the room. This isn't a moral failing or a societal breakdown. It's a calculated evolutionary strategy. In the human arena, victimhood has been quietly transformed into a potent new currency. Okay, let's unpack this. Our deep dive today is into this phenomenon, which researchers are calling virtuous victim signaling. We're going to be looking at the strategic side of communicating suffering, what that signal actually activates in our minds, and then the really serious consequences when this new currency is used to bypass competence and merit.
And this isn't just some, abstract social theory.
Not at all.
This is really the operating system for how resources, attention, and even status are being distributed in our 21st century digital society.
That's a great way to put it, an operating system.
What's so fascinating here is how this whole strategy exploits these deeply evolved mechanisms, things that were originally intended for cooperation and fairness.
Right.
We're going to examine how our natural compassion, which is, an essential human trait refined over millennia to help us survive in groups, how that can become what some researchers literally term an attack surface for manipulation.
An attack surface. So our own empathy can be used against us.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This dynamic leads directly to resource redistribution, which is the immediate goal. But it also, and this is critical, grants what's called moral immunity for the person doing the signaling.
Okay, we definitely need to get into what moral immunity means.
We will.
Mm-hmm.
The entire dynamic really hinges on this one fact. Humans are, for the most part, hardwired to help. And strategic actors have figured out the precise social signals that unlock that impulse, effectively turning our own altruism against us.
So to really understand the power of this new currency, we have to look at its anatomy. We have to break it down.
Right.
Because this isn't just a person asking for help, which, has been happening since the beginning of human existence. This is something else. It's a deliberate public cocktail of two very distinct forms of communication.
Exactly.
First, we have what researchers define as victim signaling. And this is the public and intentional expression of one's disadvantages, suffering, oppression, or personal limitations.
And that intentional and public aspect is absolutely crucial here.
Yeah.
This isn't quiet suffering. It's a broadcast. It's meant to be seen.
A performance almost.
In many cases, yes.
Yeah.
The signal can be very personal, very anecdotal, like, say, disclosing a parent's history with addiction or detailing a personal physical limitation. But it can also be leveraged through these broader identity claims. Things like expressing that, people like me are underrepresented in a certain field, or claiming one's needs aren't being heard or validated by political leaders or existing institutions.
So the key function is just establishing a recognized position of disadvantage.
That's the first step. Establish that position.
And then the strategy layers in the other component, virtue signaling. This is the symbolic demonstration that leads observers, people like you, to make favorable inferences about the signaler's moral character. These are the public acts, sometimes they're trivial, sometimes they're profound, that project an image of superior ethical standing.
Think about the classic examples you see every day. Telling everyone you volunteer for a popular charity, or wearing lapel badges, putting hashtags in your bio, using symbols to identify yourself as a supporter of fashionable or socially validated causes.
Right. It's a shortcut to show you're a good person.
It is. These demonstrations project a superior moral character. They suggest benevolence, fairness, a commitment to justice. They effectively pre-screen the individual as one of the good guys.
So The moment these two components merge, the victim signal and the virtue signal, you get what the research is calling virtuous victim signaling, or VVS.
That's the combination.
It's the claim of disadvantage plus the claim of moral superiority. And it's hypothesized to be maximally effective as a resource extraction strategy.
Right, because it completely transforms a standard plea for help, which is always subject to some skepticism, into something that feels like a morally justified, almost undeniable command for intervention.
That's a command, not a request.
Exactly. The research positions VVS not just as some unfortunate social trend, but as a really potent social influence tactic. And its goal is dual.
Okay.
First, to motivate resource transfer, and that can be anything: money, time, attention, job opportunities. But second, and this is maybe more profound, it grants the claimant something incredibly powerful in the social arena: moral immunity.
Moral immunity. Okay, let's stop there. If they successfully signal that they're both virtuous and suffering, are you saying they essentially get to operate outside the normal rules of moral behavior?
That is the mechanism, yes. By successfully occupying that category of the virtuous victim, they are shielded from criticism about their own moral transgressions.
What kind of transgressions?
It could be minor deceptions, strategic exaggeration of their suffering, or even aggressive intimidation directed toward their perceived oppressors.
Because they've established a position where they can demand compensation, the resource transfer, while also being immunized from the moral scrutiny that everyone else faces.
Exactly. The narrative, by its very definition, implies that any failing they might exhibit isn't personal. It's a result of the oppression they've endured.
That structural advantage is it's staggering. So why does pairing virtue with victimhood work so much better than just victimhood alone? What are the mechanisms that make that combination so irresistible to us?
Well, the researchers identified three key overlapping advantages to this strategic pairing. The first one really centers on trustworthiness and reciprocity.
Okay.
The virtue signal is the foundation here. It projects an image of superior moral character, benevolent intentions. In any large social structure, cooperation is maintained through reciprocal altruism. I help you today, knowing I can rely on you tomorrow.
So we're more willing to transfer resources, even to strangers, if we expect that our generosity will be matched in the future. It strengthens the social safety net for everyone.
That's the evolutionary logic. So if I see someone suffering, but they also demonstrate that they're a genuinely virtuous person, my brain processes helping them as a safer, sounder social investment than helping just a random stranger.
That makes perfect sense.
By signaling virtue, the claimant suggests they are a trustworthy person who's committed to the social contract. This legitimizes a request for what's called non-reciprocal resource transfer.
Meaning, I give you something now without expecting you to pay me back directly.
Exactly. Because the signaling suggests you're a high-value person who will likely benefit society later on, or at the very least you'll uphold moral standards. It's like an advance on their expected future goodness.
That clarifies the mechanism beautifully. Okay, what about the second advantage? How does virtue address that natural skepticism we all feel when a stranger asks us for help?
Well, the second advantage is credibility. We evolved to be wary of free riders and manipulators. It's a survival trait.
Of course.
So observers, that's you, naturally apply a degree of skepticism when someone is asking for resources. But the virtue signal acts as powerful external supporting evidence for the legitimacy of the victim signal. It tells the audience, this isn't a lazy person, this isn't a dishonest person.
So the virtue part is basically saying, I'm not the type of person who would lie about this specific hardship. It lowers the audience's guard because they feel like they've already confirmed the signaler's moral credentials.
You've got it. The portrayal of oneself as a moral person helps overcome that natural vigilance and skepticism that observers would ordinarily apply, particularly when they're deciding to transfer scarce resources. The virtue preemptively neutralizes the counter-narrative of undeservingness.
And the third benefit, that ties directly into our sense of justice and moral order.
The third benefit is all about deservingness and reward. We hold this intuitive, almost subconscious expectation that good people should generally be rewarded, or at least they shouldn't suffer excessively.
The world should be fair.
Right. And signaling virtue sparks a strong desire in observers to reward the person for their persistent moral character. Their suffering positively disconfirms that moral expectation. If they are so good, why are they hurting?
And that dissonance creates an urge to correct it.
It does. That dissonance is resolved by the observer feeling compelled to intervene, making the virtuous victim seem inherently deserving of immediate support and maximum resources.
This moves the claimant from simply being someone who needs help to someone who deserves justice.
A whole different category.
Let's see this in action then. What does the empirical evidence actually say about the effectiveness of this dual signal in extracting resources?
The findings are surprisingly consistent across a lot of different methodologies. In one of the earliest experimental studies, researchers used these short, carefully constructed scenarios. They called them vignettes, where they manipulated the victim status and the virtue status of a person in distress.
Can you give us an example of how they did that manipulation? It sounds tricky.
It's quite clever. They would describe a person who was, let's say, a gunshot victim. That's the victim's signal. Then they would manipulate the virtue status by describing the location where the injury occurred.
The context.
The context, exactly. For instance, being shot while waiting outside a community school would signal higher virtue and responsibility than, say, being shot late at night outside an adult entertainment venue like a strip club. The context forces an immediate subconscious moral judgment by the observer.
So what did they find when they mixed and matched these variables?
Well, the combination of high victim status and high virtue status, the VVS scenario, it elicited the maximal positive helping response. Overwhelmingly so.
And if the virtue was low?
The researchers saw significantly less willingness to help the victim if the context suggested low virtue, even if the actual suffering was identical. This just shows that the context matters immensely and that observers are actively looking for that virtue signal to legitimize their own impulse to help.
That makes sense for an acute, easy-to-judge scenario like a crime victim. But VVS is often deployed in more complex long-term resource requests, especially in the digital economy. Did researchers test this in a more modern context?
They did. They moved to a highly realistic simulation of online resource transfer, mimicking a crowdfunding context. It's a perfect environment for observing these behaviors at scale.
Right.
Participants were presented with scenarios involving a target named Jessie, who was requesting help. The researchers manipulated the strength of her victimhood, so a strong, detailed story of hardship versus a weak, generalized request, and the presence of a virtue signal.
Like statements about being hardworking, dedicated, or caring for others.
Exactly those kinds of things.
So what were the key takeaways from the Jessie scenario?
The simulation confirmed that VVS was significantly more effective than victim signaling alone. But here's the crucial refinement. The effect was particularly potent when the victim signal was weak.
That's the strategic sweet spot, isn't it? If your hardship is obvious and overwhelming, you don't need the virtue signal quite as much. But if you're just slightly disadvantaged, the virtue signal becomes the resource multiplier.
Precisely. In the condition where Jessie only requested help without adding strong, difficult life details, that's the weak victim condition, the virtue signal dramatically boosted her perception of deservingness. Simply adding a statement about her virtuous character increased deservingness perceptions by over a full point on a 7-point scale.
That's a huge jump.
It's massive. That inclusion moved her from being widely perceived as undeserving to securely in the deserving category. This is the leverage VVS provides. It covers credibility gaps.
And if the victim signal was already strong, the virtue signal still helped, right? It wasn't redundant.
Oh, absolutely. The willingness to help was highest overall in the strong victim virtue signal condition, which highlights the additive effect. But the most important finding for the strategic signaler is that VVS provides insurance for a weak or questionable claim. If you can't fully articulate intense suffering, you compensate by articulating intense goodness.
And this strategic deployment, it's not just about financial resource transfer like crowdfunding, is it? Does VVS work for non-economic resources?
It absolutely does. The studies confirm that VVS is a generalized tool for social influence. For instance, when participants were asked about someone they knew personally, a person who emitted signals of being a virtuous victim was significantly more likely to receive favors, time, and general non-economic support from others in their social circles.
So it works on strangers and it works on friends.
The strategy is highly adaptive. It works across social distance, from anonymous strangers in a crowdfunding simulation to close acquaintances. The signal is designed to elicit a fundamental human response, regardless of the resource being requested.
Okay, so now we transition from the mechanism of the signal to the mechanism of the receiver, the core of why this VVS strategy is so effective.
Yes, and it taps directly into our evolved compulsion for altruism and compassion.
This brings us back to that evolutionary paradox we touched on earlier. If nature favors the strong, why on earth are we wired to transfer resources, sometimes at a significant personal cost, to a vulnerable stranger?
Well, altruism is often defined as an action intended to help others, even when it runs contrary to the actor's self-interest. But behavioral studies consistently confirm that humans are naturally inclined toward these behaviors, even toward strangers, and critically, without any expectation of future interaction.
Which rules out simple tit-for-tat reciprocity.
It does. It suggests an intrinsic motivation.
So if there's no immediate external payoff, what's the internal payoff for the giver? What's in it for them?
The benefit is neurochemical. It's the intrinsic reward we often call the warm glow.
The warm glow.
Engaging in altruistic behaviors provides physical and psychological benefits to the giver that often outweigh the material cost of the resource being transferred. These benefits correlate with measurable increases in happiness, improved health markers, and even longevity.
Sounds almost too good to be true. How significant are those benefits, really?
They're profound.
Yeah.
I mean, consider studies where participants were simply asked to count acts of kindness they performed in 1 week. Just doing that significantly increased their self-reported levels of happiness.
Wow.
Or look at longitudinal studies on older adults. Those who volunteered regularly showed reduced rates of depression and anxiety, and even showed a significant measurable reduction, a remarkable 44% decrease in mortality risk.
44%. After controlling for their prior health status.
Yes, after controlling for prior health.
That is a staggering evolutionary mandate. It suggests that helping someone isn't just a moral choice. It's a profound biological strategy for self-preservation and thriving within a cooperative group.
Which is what makes us highly susceptible to manipulation by VVS.
The fact that giving feels good is the critical vulnerability.
Exactly. The VVS signaler is essentially exploiting a weakness in our psychological firewall. And neuroimaging studies have actually mapped the specific patterns of activity across 3 main brain networks that get activated when we process suffering and decide to give.
Okay, let's get into the neural wiring, starting with the immediate payoff. The first network is the reward network, the motivator. Where in the brain are we processing this warm glow?
This involves the core reward processing regions of the brain. The key players are the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, the striatum, and the nucleus accumbens, an ACC. This VTA striatum pathway is essentially the brain's pleasure circuit.
The same circuit that lights up when you eat delicious food or fall in love
or receive unexpected money, yes.
So if I give a donation to a virtuous victim, I get the same chemical hit as if I received that money myself. Is that what you're saying?
That's the fascinating insight from fMRI studies on charitable giving. Activation in the VTA striatum is seen when money is received either by the self or by a charity.
Incredible.
The brain registers the act of giving itself as intrinsically rewarding, on par with receiving a personal monetary gain. The VVS signaler is offering you a chance to feel pleasure by providing them with resources.
That completely reframes the entire interaction. I'm not purely sacrificing something. I'm engaging in a behavior that my brain has tagged as a beneficial dopamine release.
And we can't forget the analytical side of this network, which involves the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC. This is a complex region involved in monitoring conflict and decision-making. Specifically, a part of it called the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, the SGACC, becomes active for costly donations.
Costly donations. So the SGACC is involved in the actual decision to part with a resource. Is my brain running a real-time cost-benefit analysis on my own generosity?
It appears so. The SGACC is thought to be analyzing whether the benefit, be it the internal warm glow or the external boost to one's reputation, is worth the material cost of the donation.
And when the VVS signal is successful,
it maximizes the perceived benefit. I am helping a very moral person while minimizing the perceived moral conflict. It is clearly just and necessary. This ensures the SGACC signs off on the costly transfer.
That explains the motivation, but what about the immediate emotional reaction? What network actually triggers that initial urgent need to act?
That's the job of the emotional salience network, the trigger. These regions are designed to orient our attention to emotionally provocative and survival-critical situations. The key areas here are the insula and the amygdala.
Okay, let's start with the insula. Why is it so involved in the decision to help?
The insula is central to processing negative emotional states and interception, the sense of what's happening inside your own body. In a social context, the insula lights up intensely in response to the distress of a partner, but also when we think about the consequences of making a selfish or unfair choice.
So it's a kind of moral alarm system.
That's a great way to think of it. Studies have shown that stronger insula activity in response to perceived unfair decisions led directly to fewer subsequent selfish decisions by participants. The VVS content detailing trauma and injustice is designed to activate this alarm system, warning you that not acting would be morally negligent.
The insula pushes us toward equity and fairness. What about the amygdala? We usually associate that with fear and the fight or flight response.
And it is highly sensitive to threat, but it's also highly sensitive to emotional stimuli in general, especially those that signal immediate vulnerability. Researchers have noted that fearful facial expressions are particularly strong, evolved elicitors of compassion and altruism, regardless of how safe we are personally.
So the amygdala detects the vulnerability and initiates a care response.
Exactly.
Does this imply that high VVS content online is specifically curated to mimic the nonverbal cues of distress we evolved to respond to in person? It's trying to simulate that fearful face response.
That is precisely the theory. The crafting of these detailed, emotionally charged narratives, the victim signal, is designed to override our detached processing centers and trigger the primitive, urgent response of the amygdala.
Is there direct evidence for that?
There is. To confirm this, researchers studied extreme altruists, anonymous kidney donors, and compared their brain function with controls. The altruists exhibited both increased amygdala volume and, crucially, increased reactivity to fearful faces.
So they're neurobiologically hardwired for heightened concern.
It appears so, yes. And that directly drives their high-cost altruistic behavior. The victim signal is the perfect key to unlock this heightened concern.
This makes VVS look like a master key to our emotional infrastructure. It's successfully exploiting our ability to process others' suffering, not just for financial reward, but by hacking our deepest neural pathways for vulnerability and survival.
Which brings us to the third essential network, the one that provides moral and contextual judgment. The mentalizing or theory of mind network. Yes, this network is absolutely necessary to understand the suffering and emotional states of others and to evaluate their intentions. It involved the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC, and the temporoparietal junction, the TPJ.
So if the reward network says go, it feels good, and the salience network says go, it's urgent. The TOM network is where we assess the moral justification.
That's it. The VVS strategy is utterly dependent on successful social judgment. The MPFC is central to reputation processing, mentalizing, distinguishing between self and others. Research shows that increased dorsal MPFC activity predicts the subsequent allocation of more resources to a partner in economic games.
So this region is where the brain evaluates the target's moral worth, the virtue part of VVS, and the perceived legitimacy of their need, the victim part.
And the VVS signal tries to guarantee a positive moral verdict in the MPFC. The temporoparietal junction, the TPJ, is also heavily involved in perspective taking. Activation there occurs when you're actively engaged in thinking about the emotions and inner states of others.
And a good VVS narrative makes you do just that.
Exactly. The more successfully the narrative helps you understand the signaler's perceived suffering and oppression, the more active the TPJ becomes, deepening your sense of connection and shared fate.
And beyond just helping the victim, we also have this evolved drive for justice, which VVS also exploits perfectly.
Absolutely. We have a fundamental human imperative toward fairness, which can manifest as altruistic punishment. This is where even third parties who are not directly affected by an injustice will willingly pay a cost, say one monetary unit, to punish a perceived violator.
And the punishment is usually bigger than the cost.
Much bigger. Maybe a 3-unit penalty for the transgressor.
That's fascinating. We are willing to incur a personal loss just to enforce a social norm.
It demonstrates a powerful, evolved, egalitarian motive, a form of strong reciprocity that's essential to maintaining cooperation in large groups. When a VVS signaler claims oppression, they are mobilizing this third-party justice instinct in you.
And the kicker is that it feels good.
And crucially, just like altruistic helping, altruistic punishment activates reward regions like the striatum.
That's the ultimate mechanism for exploitation then. The VVS signaler gets the resource transfer, and the observers get a neurochemical rush of moral satisfaction from both distributing those resources and punishing the perceived offender. It feels good to be the virtuous one defending the victim.
A closed loop.
We've established that VVS is an incredibly effective social hack that exploits our neurobiology. The next question, which is arguably where it gets really interesting, is who is deploying this tactic most frequently? If this is a strategic manipulation, researchers hypothesize that individuals exhibiting dark triad traits, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy, would be the primary users.
And the data was robust in supporting this, really robust. Studies showed that high VVS scores were strongly predicted by dark triad traits. And critically, this relationship held even after controlling for a whole host of demographic and socioeconomic variables commonly associated with actual victimization.
Such as
income level, disability status, sexual orientation.
So it's not simply that people who have genuinely suffered are signaling more. This really confirms the behavior is strategic and manipulative, rather than just being reactive or descriptive of past trauma.
Exactly. The predictive power of the dark triad traits for high VVS scores strongly suggests an instrumental motivation, the intentional use of deceptive social signaling to achieve a goal.
And when you drilled down into the individual traits, which ones were the primary drivers?
The association was consistently strongest with Machiavellianism and narcissism. Machiavellianism, in fact, emerged as the strongest single predictor of VVS use.
And that fits the profile perfectly.
It fits perfectly. The Machiavellian profile is one of an instrumental, manipulative orientation, characterized by the amoral use of deception and a general disregard of conventional moral standards to achieve personal resource transfer.
So the Machiavellian individual just views VVS as an efficiency tool. They see a social vulnerability or compassion, and they strategically exploit it without any moral conflict.
Precisely. They are less driven by needing attention, which is more narcissistic, or immediate thrills, which is more psychopathic. They're driven by the cold calculation that this signaling is the most direct path to self-benefit and resource extraction in a given social environment. They see the victim-virtue dynamic as a sophisticated, low-risk technique for social hacking.
Now, narcissism seems a little counterintuitive here. A classic narcissist is grandiose. They signal superiority and strength. Why would they ever signal weakness and victimhood?
This is where trait specificity is absolutely key. While generalized narcissism is a predictor, the strongest positive predictor was a specific variant. Communal narcissism.
Communal narcissism.
It's a fascinating subtype. Unlike the grandiose narcissist who boasts about their wealth or success, the communal narcissist asserts their superiority through their exaggerated claims of prosociality and moral dedication.
So they don't claim to be the smartest or the richest. They claim to be the most caring person in the room.
Exactly. Their belief system is encapsulated by statements used on the scale to measure it. Things like, I am the most caring person in my social surrounding, or I will be remembered for the good deeds I have done.
So this belief in their own superior morality makes the virtue signal feel authentic to them.
Yes, and that provides a powerful internal justification for their manipulative behavior.
That distinction is critical. They are genuinely convinced they are the best type of person to suffer, which means they are the most deserving of attention, resources, and subsequent redistribution. They leverage victimhood not out of a sense of weakness, but as a vehicle to assert their moral status.
It connects their narcissistic need for superiority directly to the VVS strategy. They believe they deserve resources because their suffering is inherently more meaningful and morally instructive than anyone else's. This allows them to project intense virtue while simultaneously extracting resources. It fits the VVS dual mandate perfectly.
And what about psychopathy? You mentioned it was a less significant predictor of the signaling itself.
Right. Psychopathy, which is characterized primarily by callousness, impulsivity, and antisocial behavior, was found to be a weaker predictor of VVS frequency. The behavior required for VVS, the sustained, nuanced performance of virtue and deep suffering, is perhaps too sophisticated or just too patient for the average psychopathic profile.
They tend to favor more immediate, less socially complex forms of exploitation.
I think so. However, the total dark triad score still predicts the behavior. So if an individual scores highly across the whole spectrum, they're more likely to deploy VVS.
That brings us to the fourth trait, sadism, which is often included in the dark tetrad. If Machiavellians and narcissists are the architects of the VVS signal, what role does the sadist play in the resulting social dynamic?
It's a different role. Sadism, which is the pleasure derived from inflicting pain or humiliation, did not predict the frequency of virtuous victim signaling. They generally don't initiate the claim, but sadism did significantly predict an associated behavior, exploiting the social opportunity to victimize the accused.
So, the Machiavellian uses the VVS signal to get resources, and the sadist uses the resulting social conflict to inflict pain and gain pleasure.
Precisely. The theory highlights that Machiavellianism and narcissism are focused on resource capture for self-benefit. Sadism, however, exploits the moral license that is granted by non-victims. When a virtuous victim successfully signals oppression, the social group often legitimizes aggressive, punitive actions against the perceived oppressor or victimizer.
The sadist doesn't need to be the victim themselves, they just need the victim to successfully create a target that society sanctions attacking.
Exactly. They capitalize on the social momentum generated by the VVS, taking pleasure in opportunistically harming people who have been designated as morally culpable. This victimizing behavior was measured using highly specific items in the research.
Like what?
Like endorsing the statement, enjoyed helping cancel someone, get them shunned by their community or social group due to perceived wrongdoings, whether real or fabricated.
Wow, the public performance of condemnation?
Yes, and another item was joined in on the persecution and condemnation of an individual or group accused of victimizing others. This establishes a dark chain reaction. The strategic signaler gains material benefits and immunity, and the sadist gains an ethically justified outlet for their aggression and cruelty. The entire social ecology becomes geared toward resource extraction and punitive action, leveraging our compassion as its fuel.
Moving beyond the profile of the signaler, we have to confront the system-level consequences of allowing VVS to become such a dominant and rewarding strategy.
And the digital environment acts as a massive amplifier here, creating a powerful competitive feedback loop, resulting in what we can call the marketplace of misery.
The digital economy rewards emotion and engagement above almost everything else. So if sadness and victimhood generate more engagement than mastery and competence, we are effectively incentivizing a constant performance of fragility.
That is the profound destabilizing force. Consider the case of Marcus, the content creator. He was a designer who spent years signaling skill and mastery creating high-quality, practical graphic design tutorials. By every traditional metric, he was producing high-value content.
And yet he struggled financially.
He did. His brain, operating on that evolved principle of fairness, told him that hard work and competence should be rewarded through reciprocal altruism. But the platform rewarded the opposite.
It did.
Marcus found immediate, explosive financial reward. His donation platforms and Patreon numbers soared, only after fundamentally changing his signal. He broke down on camera, framing his lack of professional success, not as a failure to connect with the market based on skill, but as a result of systemic oppression and overwhelming fragile mental health.
He effectively traded his competence signal for a VVS signal and immediately achieved success. He found that performing his weakness was a far more potent magnetic hook than demonstrating his strength.
And this is the long-term societal cost. When the display of weakness becomes a more potent currency than strength or skill, it forces content creators and individuals into a marketplace that financially rewards the performance of misery.
And then the individual is trapped. They're compelled to perform increasing levels of despair just to maintain their income.
Yes, it exploits the dignity of the person, and crucially, it completely drowns out the voices of those in genuine, silent crisis, who are often characterized by stoicism and a reluctance to broadcast their suffering for consumption.
And the strategic nature of this goes beyond just resource transfer. The research suggests that individuals who successfully deploy VVS are also more comfortable with deception and have a flexible, instrumental approach to morality.
That is a critical finding. It confirms that the VVS strategy is rooted in utilitarian manipulation. We saw clear evidence of this in behavioral studies where they measured general honesty for personal gain. Participants high in VVS were more likely to engage in calculated dishonesty.
Give us the details on that behavioral study.
Researchers used a classic behavioral coin flip game in a virtual environment, designed specifically to measure cheating where detection was impossible. Participants were told they could earn a small monetary bonus, only a single dollar, if they reported a specific outcome, regardless of the actual flip.
And the findings were
stark. Participants high in VVS were significantly more likely to cheat and lie about the outcome of their coin flip to earn that small bonus.
Lying for a dollar. That shows an instrumental deception that is totally disproportionate to the gain. They're willing to compromise their integrity for a minimal benefit.
It points to a deep, instrumental approach to morality, a willingness to use dishonesty strategically whenever a self-serving opportunity arises, regardless of the stakes. And this strategic amorality extends to their judgment of others' moral transgressions as well.
That's where the counterfeit goods study comes in, right?
Yes. High VVS signalers showed a distinctive pattern. They were significantly more willing to purchase counterfeit products, and critically, they judged the producers of those counterfeit goods as less immoral compared with low signalers.
Why counterfeit goods? What's the connection?
Counterfeit goods are an interesting proxy here because they are inherently based on instrumental deception. They grant the purchaser the high-status presentation of an authentic good, but at a low, deceptive cost.
So those who use VVS to gain status benefits like resources and moral immunity through deception are more comfortable with others who use deception to gain status benefits like a luxury brand appearance.
That is the link. The willingness to endorse instrumental dishonesty, and this effect was specific to counterfeit goods, it did not apply to generic products, reinforces the idea that VVS is a manifestation of dark triad traits like Machiavellianism, where morality isn't a fixed code, but a tool to be used or discarded as necessary to achieve status or resource accumulation.
The ultimate concern here is what happens when this signaling strategy infiltrates high-stakes, life-critical institutions where meritocracy should be the absolute highest priority.
This brings us to the most alarming long-term consequence: institutional erosion. Institutions often operate as third-party arbiters, and they're highly motivated to avoid perceived moral censure. When VVS is deployed successfully, these institutions begin to reward the articulation of suffering over the demonstration of objective capacity.
The student scenario, Elena, illustrates this perfectly in academia.
Exactly. We see Elena, a student focused entirely on objective competence, receiving a B- on a critical assessment because she missed the deadline. She gets a lecture on responsibility. Meanwhile, a peer who missed the same assignment but strategically emailed a curated narrative detailing overwhelming personal anxiety, intergenerational trauma, and lack of support, the full VVS toolkit receives a complete extension and ultimately an A grade.
The institution prioritized the articulation of subjective suffering over the objective performance required by the course criteria. The currency of competence was momentarily invalidated.
And this extends into highly sensitive professional fields. Consider the case observed by a senior civil engineer, Dr. Aris, who was involved in hiring in Western Europe. His firm was filling the crucial role of safety lead for large public works bridges, dams, critical infrastructure.
Fields where objective, flawless, technical, predictive capacity is literally the difference between safety and catastrophic failure.
The only thing that matters.
Yeah.
And the hiring board faced two candidates. One candidate had flawless technical predictive scores, top quartile in every objective engineering metric. The other candidate had technical scores that were just average, but their application narrative was entirely devoted to detailing their lived experience and past trauma, framing it as overcoming systemic barriers.
And despite the life-critical nature of the role, which demands objective excellence, they passed over the technically flawless candidate.
They favored the candidate whose technical scores were average. Aris noted that the board was motivated by signaling its own moral virtue and was visibly terrified of public relations backlash or being accused of bias. They prioritized the subjective, strategic articulation of identity and suffering, the VVS narrative over objective, life-critical metrics of engineering capacity.
The signal for status had completely decoupled from competence in a field where the consequences of failure are death and disaster.
And here is where we connect this back to the core sociological warning: the risk of a behavioral sink.
Explain that concept.
The behavioral sink as a concept refers to a catastrophic failure of a complex social system. It was first observed in overly dense animal populations, where the focus shifts entirely from objective needs like food or infrastructure maintenance to overwhelming social interaction and signaling.
So the concern here is that if competence-based status hierarchies are entirely eroded and institutions prioritize narrative over objective capacity in life-critical fields, society risks a structural failure.
That failure means bridges fall, dams break, and critical systems fail not because of technical incompetence, but because the social infrastructure, the hiring, the rewarding, the allocation of status has prioritized fragility and performance over functional ability.
That's a terrifying thought.
It is. The shift means that the objective physical systems of our complex modern society are no longer being managed by the most technically capable individuals, but by the most socially adept signalers of virtue and victimhood. We have to find a way to honor genuine human struggle and the necessary complexity of diverse perspectives without compromising the objective standards and meritocratic demands that keep the lights on and keep society functioning safely.
So what does this all mean? The idea that virtuous victim signaling is a strategic behavior designed to manipulate moral agents to achieve resource transfer is not just an idea. It is empirically supported and strongly linked to individuals scoring high on Machiavellianism and communal narcissism. This strategy exploits our deepest, most potent neural mechanisms for compassion and fairness, turning our altruism into an attack surface.
And the strategic value and confirmed effectiveness of VVS mean that significant aid, attention, and opportunity are frequently diverted from those legitimately deserving of help, who may suffer silently or lacks a strategic dexterity to signal effectively toward individuals utilizing this duplicitous tactic. The ubiquity of victimhood claims, amplified by the digital social context, means our evolved obligation to alleviate suffering is under constant strategic exploitation.
The new social currency is the strategic articulation of suffering and virtue. While this provides immense short-term gains for the successful signaler, it risks undermining the very foundations of trust, merit, and objective competence. If complex societies cannot reliably identify and reward technical capacity, their ability to sustain life-critical infrastructure diminishes, raising the specter of institutional erosion and a behavioral sink. The future stability of high-functioning society depends on our collective ability to look past the performance and recognize the difference between genuine need and strategic exploitative signaling.